Welcome into Beyond Sunday. I'm your host, Luke, and I am joined by Ron Sylvia, the lead pastor here at Church of Springs, also my father, if it is your first time tuning in. Now, I wanted to talk about this. First of all, how are you?
I'm great.
We got
doing
Easter
good.
coming up, so we've been meeting about that for some weeks now.
Mm-hmm.
We got a new series coming up as well.
Starting this Sunday.
Yes, and the name of that series is "Hey God, I Have a Question." Right?
Yeah. And that's going to be a great series. Man, we are really looking forward to it.
Yeah, and you mentioned it. So we've been, if you are, and likely if you're listening to this, you were here on a Sunday, or maybe you missed this last Sunday, but you talked about the end at the close after Thomas Christensen from Open Church in Denmark, one of the church planners that we partner with. After he spoke, you mentioned in the close of the service, we've got this new series coming up. We've been taking people's questions starting this week at the Ocala campus. We took them out of some other campuses the week prior. Also went to social media for those as well and been just gathering questions. If you could ask God a question, what would it be? And one thing that you said was the ones that we don't get to, which there's a lot, we will not get to all of them, even in podcast form. But we do want to use this platform to go through some of those throughout the series. Other people's questions, maybe deeper questions that require even more thought than what we can give whatever part that one question gets in the message. Yeah. So that'll be a lot of fun. That's coming up. And then we've got Easter shortly after that, end of April. So our team's been getting ready for that, and we're super excited about it. Now, talking about Thomas Christensen being here this past weekend, you mentioned it. He mentioned it, kind of the talks of how you guys connected in 2017.
Yeah.
I think that was it, right? With the Shark Tank.
2018.
I want to actually talk about the Shark Tank now that I'm thinking about it. Because that's a show that everybody knows. Yeah. But how does that work when it comes to the church planting world? Well, how did you guys use that?
I mean, I think every church planter is an entrepreneur. So we're all drawn to Shark Tank.
Yeah.
We love the pitch, and I watched that show years ago and thought, we need to do this with church planters. And we started doing it long before 2018 at our conferences, where we would have guys apply, and then they would come into the Shark Tank, and they were applying for like a $5,000 grant for their church plant, and they had to pitch it, and it was fun because we had veteran church planners, were the Sharks, and the first time they came in the room, we told them, we're not going to ask you any questions. You have 2 minutes to pitch your church. And then when 2 minutes is up, you're done. And they pitch it, and we just stare at them. And they'd walk out.
That's so funny.
And then the top pitches we brought back in for the final round. And then we said, when you come back in, now it's our turn to ask questions. And we just went Shark Tank on them, asking about their financial plans and their, strategy for launching and their core team and why that city and all of the foundational issues that you're trying to help planters understand. These are really important. And these are also success markers. You're going to have a better chance of success if you're doing these things. So after we asked the questions, then they went back out, and we pulled the Sharks together, and we decided which one got the $5,000.
And you guys gave it to a few different church planners. Was that right, or was it just Thomas? Okay.
Yeah.
So there was a few different ones. And I think that's interesting for people to hear about, because our church has such a heart for planning churches, because it's kind of just been ingrained in the DNA of the Springs. But I think people still don't always realize that, yes, it is a ministry, and essentially it's a not-for-profit, right, organization.
Very not-for-profit.
But at the same time, it is a business. It's and like you said, it's very entrepreneurial to be planning churches. You're basically starting a business on steroids because of what your mission is, right? Your mission is the reason that it's called a ministry, but your how is a business plan. Like, how do we do this?
Well, we've learned through the years that what are the best strategies, methodologies, because there's so many different types of church plants. Now, we focus on launch large church plants because we say we want to help them go further faster. Because typically what we find out is if a church plant doesn't grow beyond 150 in the first 2 years, it very seldom ever does. It just gets stuck
Right.
and it remains that size. And because of that, you're on life support as opposed to being a healthy, growing church that reproduces other churches. So,
Yeah.
and that's all part of the model and the strategy.
And you had Thomas this weekend showing the map of all the things that they are doing.
Isn't that crazy?
And is it statistically the most unchurched area or close to it
Well,
in the world?
a lot of guys say that,
Right.
I think that's.
I know
the sales
Montreal's another one.
Yeah,
as far as
that's why I say
evangelical.
church planters don't say I'm planting in the most unchurched region of the country. They all say that,
Right.
But it is. I mean, because we literally had somebody that was visiting in Copenhagen, and they called me and they said we always go in wherever we're traveling and ask the locals where can we go to church, and this guy said I asked like 15 people. And not one person could tell me where a church was.
Wow.
So that's pretty unchurched.
Yeah. But what they're doing out there is they're doing. Did I see college campus on that board as well?
Thomas and Christina, we love them to death, man. We just got really connected with them, and they're good friends. But they were Christina was the administrator for a Christian college, which is it's a smaller college, but they literally were just given that and said, why don't you take the leadership? So they're raising up this generation of young worship leaders and pastors and ministry.
Wow.
Reaching the next generation. And I mean, and so because of that, they've tapped in and they're attracting so many young leaders.
And they've been doing so much cool stuff, and the drive-in stuff that they were doing that they got from us, that Thomas said he got from us during COVID, and how that took off and was covered at news stations and everything that they did.
Yeah, it was covered on national news.
He said like New York Times and stuff like that.
New York Times wrote an article. Yeah.
That's crazy.
It was unbelievable because I think Denmark is such an unchurched nation. To see that taking off there and the creativity, it really made a mark.
Yeah, so awesome what Thomas has done, and I thought that would be a great time now for us to just talk church planting. So as far as we'll cover things like, did you ever think that you would be supporting church plants across the world? When did you shift from being a church planter yourself to helping plant churches with partnering with other people, and kind of your passion, your why behind it? And I think maybe we can start there, and just why and how, like, when did it start for you that you were like, whoa, there's a bunch of young men and their wives and that just are hungry for and need some help in church planting, and they don't know where to turn.
Yeah. Well, I think it came out of our own need. When we started the Springs, there was one book on church planting.
Wow.
Aubrey Malphurs at Dallas Theological wrote one book. And today, I mean, there's thousands of books on church planting. And so for us, that there was no training. There was nobody doing conferences it just didn't exist. And so when we started, we knew God called us. And honestly, the first 2 years were, they were hard years.
Right.
And Mom and I, we sat down and said, as we prayed through it, we literally prayed and said, God, if you will let us live through this, we will always give back to church planters behind us.
Wow. Yeah.
And that's what we did. It's Rick Warren always used to say that God wants to recycle your pain. And church planting, there was a lot of pain to be recycled, but there were a lot of lessons. I coined a phrase and I said, we're going to learn in return. We're going to learn, how to plant churches and how to lead growing churches, and we're going to return it to the kingdom.
Yeah.
And that's what I always challenge church planners. And I love that about church planners because that's kind of in their DNA. There used to be a time where, just like in business, pastors that were leading growing churches, they weren't going to share their secret, because they're kind of, I don't want everybody to know, how we're doing it.
Yeah.
And that is gone in
Right.
church planning. Church planners are like saying, take it, man. I can help you. I'll sit down. I'll share. I'll tell you what we did.
Yeah, which is kind of, how crazy is that was the way that everybody kind of moved then. Back then was like, I'm gonna keep all this.
Yeah, and they would never say that.
Well, of course,
But even in business, I mean, if you got a trade secret,
mm-hmm.
I mean, you might start a business,
right? But
selling it.
That's where it becomes a ministry, right? Like your why.
But we're all on the same mission.
Yeah.
And if we can help other churches succeed and grow,
right,
and advance the gospel in their region,
yeah,
why wouldn't you help?
Yeah, and that, and also what I have heard you say, because I've asked you. There's people that leave the church, right, that attend the church and then they don't come anymore. And I've asked you about it, like how over 30 years, why is that? Like, how do you get over that? Because it's been friends and whatever, but you have said there's a church for everybody.
Yeah,
there's a church out there. There's a church that can serve a season for you,
right?
And it doesn't mean that you have to be there forever. But like Lauren and I had that in Omaha. We attended a church for about a year and a half, and then we just transitioned over to attending another church, and we had love for both of those churches. But it was just like, for where we were at in that time in our lives, that's just the decision we decided to make, and we felt like God wanted us to go to somewhere else.
Yeah.
And so I think that once you can grasp that, oh wait, this is a ministry, and we're just trying to help people come to Christ, and there's a church for everybody. Why not share the secrets of what you're doing?
Well, and I learned that from Rick Warren, because Rick was the one that was doing that.
Yeah.
And God connected our lives, and he's really the one that said, invited us to teach at the conference, a Purpose Driven Church conference, and gave us a church health award, and said, hey, where do you want to teach? And I said, church planners. And he said, all right, it's yours. And that was it. And that was such a God moment in our lives.
Right.
We didn't realize, we weren't looking for it. I think, we had talked about earlier that, well, how did you get into this? Well, I mean, God handed us the ball.
How many years after starting the Springs did you get in to have that conversation with Rick?
We were probably 4 years old, maybe.
That's crazy. Was there a lot of imposter syndrome there of like, I don't know how to do this? Or did you feel like God kind of gave the confidence with growth in the church in early years to get you to the point where you're like, okay, I feel confident in the plan to take this?
I think I've probably always struggled with, God, why are you letting me be a part of this?
Yeah.
I mean, I've asked that question. Think about it. Why is a church planter in Ocala, Florida, training church planters nationally and internationally for Rick Warren and Purpose Driven in California? Makes no sense.
Yeah.
And that's, but man, that's where you just know that God is in it. And I believe God will use, who's it, Jim Cymbala, that quote, that humility is a magnet for the Holy Spirit. And so for me, I just said, God, I'll go wherever you tell us to go and do what you ask us to do. And it was crazy. You couldn't build a strategy to do, what we were invited into.
Yeah. There's you've had a lot of memories, obviously, that you've built from helping start churches across the world. Would you say that there's a memory that sticks out to you most, whether it's just like getting together with a certain group of church planners or leaders? Like, what has been, looking back, now at this point, you've been doing it for so long. If you look back and you think, man, that was the moment that I would say that I look pretty fondly on when it comes to working with church planners and doing all of this.
Yeah, there's so many. I like what I loved about being connected with Rick and Purpose Driven Planting was he allowed us to experiment and on a very large platform. And so we did coaching networks. And I saw that in a Christian business leaders coaching network that I was invited to. And I went, we need to do this for church planners. And we did, and we created it. And I remember sitting there at Saddleback. We flew out once a month to coach 12 church planners that came out of our conference. And to watch God begin a movement of coaching networks around the country, that was one of the launching pads for it. And then standing, even here in Ocala, we had a regional church planning conference, and we had 600 church planners in Ocala.
Crazy.
Yeah. And
no other reason they would come to Ocala, Florida.
No, it's like none of them knew where Ocala was. But it was those movements. And Mom and I, we taught at Liberty University with church planners, and we taught 800 church planners in a room at Liberty.
Wow.
How to plan a church. And it, nothing but God. Nothing but God.
Did you guys, so in working with 800, how quickly were you guys working with, because it was with Rick and Purpose Driven, that you guys were working with tons of church planners at one time? Or was there a lot of one-on-one at the very beginning, especially, where maybe there was a one of those stories of you working one-on-one with any of these church planners that was like instilled confidence that, man, this is incredible and we need to keep doing this?
I think there's so many one-on-ones, and but for us, it was, we started teaching workshops, and then Rick gave us church planning. We did the whole conference, and then they asked me to write the book and put these processes into a book, and I did that. And I think what still when we would go to the conferences, I mean, years later, and we had taught all these church planners. We taught 10,000 church planners in our conferences with PD.
Yeah.
And I would have guys, grown men, come up to me and grab me by the shoulder just walking through Saddleback and say, Ron, Sylvia, you wrecked my life. And I didn't know where that was coming from. And he stopped and he said, 4 years ago, I was in one of the church planning conferences, and God spoke clearly to me through you that I needed to plant a church. And I did. And he just started crying. And he said, I said, how's it going? He said, we have 1,200 people every weekend. Wow. And those stories over and over. And there was this one guy came up to me at a conference, and he says, he's from Nigeria, and he grabbed me and he said, I need the book. And I said, what book? And he said, I need the book. I had one book, and I have trained church planters all through Africa with the book, and one church planter took the book. And I'm sitting there going, and he spoke broken English, and then he said, and I realized he was talking about my book on church planting, that he had trained thousands of church planters in Africa using my book.
And had one copy.
And and so, that those stories, I could talk all day about those stories. And but we've always given back, and we continue to do it today, with church planters.
Growing up, all I know was that you were planning churches, you were traveling a lot, going to preview services and the launch of churches and everything. or going to coaching networks. But selfishly, my favorite part about you planning churches growing up was that if it was during the summer, especially, I'd get to tag along on some of these trips. So I think of, well, really the most recent one that I did was when I was in high school, my senior year. We went to Montreal.
Yeah.
When we went with Chris McGregor's church. We did Minnesota, and I think that was just a church planning, maybe
It was a coaching network.
a coaching network. Yeah. Minnesota, I had my first snowball fight. I also think I got my first phone in Minnesota at the Mall of America.
You did.
And then I think we went back at some point a couple years later, if I can remember correctly. We did Boston with Sean Sears, I believe, and his church, Grace Church, and then we did San Francisco.
San Francisco, we got to go see the San Francisco Giants. It's in the middle of the summer, and it was freezing. Sitting in that stadium, we had to buy a blanket. Right? And do you remember whose church that was? He was planting his church. Andy Wood.
That's crazy.
Yeah.
That's crazy because I was probably 10. This was maybe 18 years ago. Does that sound right? Probably.
Yeah.
I was young.
Yeah.
And I remember the blanket, the Giants blanket and everything, but to hear that was Andy Wood, who now is on staff at Saddleback as the lead pastor there, after Rick Warren transitioned away. That's crazy to me that you've been planting churches long enough that these guys are just their church plant was a success. It still is going, and they've transitioned to things like Saddleback as well.
They're so many of those guys are now leading networks of church planting.
Right.
They are changing the shape of this country.
Yeah.
And that's awesome. I mean, Andy was the one that coined the phrase. He started calling me the Ron Father. and it is because for me, those guys, they're grown men and leading movements, but they're my guys.
Yeah.
They're the guys that we poured into and believed in, and look what God's doing.
Yeah. A lot of guys that I would hear a lot of names growing up if you were like talking to mom about it. I would never go to dinner with you guys because I had done it a couple times. I was like, all they do is talk about church and strategy and how it's going. And as a young age, I really did not care about it. But now I care a lot. I care a lot about it. I love numbers and hearing the stories of lives that were changed. And there's a lot of power in it. I will say there was two other things that we didn't mention. Boston, we did. I don't remember if we did a Red Sox game, but we definitely did a Magic game.
Yeah.
Were there? God really was looking out for me on these trips. That they were just happened to be playing my favorite the team that was traveling on the road to this team. We did Boston, the Celtics and the Magic. We went to that game on a whim, I believe. But definitely the ones that were on the other one that was on a whim was in Atlanta. We did Atlanta for something, and the Hawks were playing. The Magic were coming to town, and remember we were in the basically the cafeteria type place at the hotel where you can get breakfast, continental breakfast. And I remember you telling me, "Hey, the Magic are playing tonight. Should we go?" And I was like, well, "Yeah." And to this day, I don't know if that was a surprise or if you just knew the Magic the whole time we're going to do it, and you decided we're going to go. So
I think we decided at breakfast.
Yeah, well, that's how I took it. I just didn't know if you maybe just didn't tell me until then.
No.
So we did that. We did the Boston game against the Magic, and a lot of really fun memories for me growing up. And Baltimore. We did Baltimore. We stayed across from Camden Yards, the stadium, the Baltimore Orioles stadium. Went to a game as well. So, yeah, a lot of really fun memories for me personally. And that's what I will remember. But growing up and seeing the magnitude of it with church planners coming in a few weeks here to Ocala for you guys to have a whole day training, coaching them, and just pouring into them, answering questions. I now realize how powerful those things are, because then you look down the road 5 years from now and it's like these guys still have their churches. They're thriving. They have crazy stories. Like we had Riley Halliday this past summer, and he was part of last year, I think, that coaching network here in Ocala at the Springs. And just the stories of them basically be given this nice incredible building that they could have never gotten
Yeah.
into otherwise.
There's some God stories out there that
That's
you hear
insane.
these guys. It's awesome.
Yeah.
I always say I get to live vicariously through church planters now.
Yeah, right.
You know, their stories, their faith moves,
Mhm.
and uh, I never want to see the day that I don't get to ride on their coattails now
Yeah.
and what God's doing through them.
Yeah, and I think that was so Riley shared this. I'm sure I can share this here. And Riley was talking to me. I think it was before his message, one of his messages in the summer, and he said, "We're all complaining." And he might have shared this in the message. I can't remember, but he's like, "We're all complaining about this is so frustrating. We're in a hard season." And he said, "And your dad is just looking at us with this look." When we were like, "What is your look?" And you just told them, "I am pretty envious that you get to live in what you're living in right now, living through, because it's one of those things in the moment you don't appreciate it,
Yeah.
but
No.
you get to now appreciate what God is doing through them
Yeah.
because of what God brought you through at the very beginning when you were there in that same situation."
And I love that. I remember that moment
Mhm.
with Riley. Yeah, but it's what I tell them. I said, guys, listen, what feel like roadblocks and hard times, God is writing the legend stories of your church plant.
Mhm.
Those aren't roadblocks. Those are moments that God is going to prove faithful, and you're going to look back and you're going to see it, and you're going to tell that story over and over again.
Yeah. So a lot of cool stories. I'm glad we've gotten to talk about and unpack a lot of them today, this morning. But
yeah, if I could
yeah.
just be asking people, pray for our church planners that are coming. We have 24 coming
Yeah.
in 2 weeks. It's actually the end of the month and the 1st of April. And they'll be here at the Springs. And that it will be a productive time for them. That'll be an encouraging time. We're going to give them strategic planning. We work with Church OS, intentional churches, and some of the best methodology how to launch churches and sustain and make strategic moves that are the right moves for the kingdom. And be praying for those guys, because their stories are just beginning to be written.
Yeah. Yeah. Super exciting to be a part of as someone that goes to the Springs, on staff at the Springs, and then just getting to see what God's going to do through them is incredible. So appreciate you guys for tuning in today, for whether you're watching on YouTube or listening on audio platforms. If you are listening on audio platforms, feel free to hit that subscribe button for us, or follow whatever platform that has. Helps us a lot. And as far as our engagement with our episodes and with Beyond Sunday in general, YouTube, subscribe to the channel there as well, and give us a like on this video. So appreciate you guys, and we will catch you guys next time. See ya.